The council chamber of the galaxy was filled with voices. Men and women from many worlds stood in long rows, their eyes fixed on the small group of warriors at the center. Guards in silver armor held their weapons close, ready to strike if ordered. The warriors stood tall, even as the judgment was read. Ethan kept his eyes forward. His hair was dark, and his face carried the marks of many battles. He had fought across stars, but this moment felt heavier than any war. Beside him stood Laura, sharp and calm, her mind always 2 steps ahead. Daniel stood with fists clenched, ready to fight even here. Claire's gaze burned with quiet fire, while Matthew's eyes moved from one council member to another, looking for even a spark of fairness. The speaker of the council raised his hand for silence. His voice echoed in the chamber as he declared the sentence. The warriors were guilty of defying the lords of the galaxy. They had refused to take part in raids against weak colonies. They had raised their voices against the cruelty of the council. For this, the judgment was exile. They would be cast out, their names stripped of honor, their deeds erased from the records of the Empire. Gasps ran through the chamber, but no one dared to speak against it. Ethan felt the weight of the words, but refused to bow his head. He had seen villages burn because of the greed of the council. He had seen chains placed on children, while rich rulers called it order. He would not regret fighting back. Laura stepped forward. Her voice was clear and strong. She told the council that history would remember this day, not as justice, but as betrayal. She said the galaxy would one day see the truth. The guards pushed her back, but her words hung in the air like steel. The council ordered the warriors to leave at once. Their ships were waiting, stripped of supplies and support. They were cast away into the empty stars with nothing but their courage. The journey away from the capital world was silent. Inside the worn ship, the 5 warriors sat together. Daniel slammed his fist against the table, anger shaking his voice. He wanted to fight, to turn back and strike at the council. Ethan stopped him. The fight here was lost, but not forever. Claire spoke of the people they had tried to defend. Farmers, workers, families who had no voice in the halls of power. She asked what would happen to them now. Silence filled the room because none had the answer. Matthew broke the silence. He said they were not finished, had their lives, their skill, and their will to resist. The council could erase their names from records, but it could not erase what they had done. He looked at Ethan, waiting for his decision. Ethan told them they would keep moving. I would find a place to gather strength. They would not bow or break. His voice carried no doubt, and for a moment the fire returned to their hearts. The ship moved through the darkness of space, engines humming like a tired beast. Stars stretched around them, cold and endless. Every world they passed closed its doors. Old allies refused to give shelter, afraid of the council's punishment. On one world, bounty hunters fired on their ship, forcing them to flee. On another, traders pretended not to know them. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of exile grew heavier. Food ran short and sleep was thin, yet none spoke of surrender. Daniel sharpened his blade each night. Claire trained in silence, ready for the next battle. Matthew worked on the ship, patching broken parts with steady hands. Laura studied maps, searching for any place that might take them in. Ethan watched them all, carrying the burden of their survival on his shoulders. One night, as they drifted near an empty system, Ethan stood at the window of the ship. He thought of Earth, the world of his birth. A world forgotten by most of the galaxy, left in the shadows of stronger powers. Dodge. He wondered if Earth still remembered its children. Laura came beside him. Dodge. She asked if he was thinking of going back. Ethan did not answer at first. Then he said maybe it was time. Earth might be weak in the eyes of the council, but it was still home. The others listened when Ethan shared his thought. At first, Daniel doubted. He said Earth was too far, too forgotten. Claire reminded him that no other place had taken them in. Matthew agreed with Ethan, saying Earth was their last chance. The decision was made. They set their course for Earth, a world abandoned by the galaxy, but still burning in their hearts. As the ship turned, a spark of hope lit in their eyes. It exiled, hunted, and broken. They still had one path left, and that path led home. The ship drifted through the endless dark, its engines carrying the group toward Earth. Weeks of exile had turned into months, and every day felt heavier than the last, yet Ethan never allowed despair to take over. He pushed his crew forward, keeping their focus sharp. Daniel trained in the hold, moving with his blade until sweat ran down his back. He said strength was all that stood between them and death. Claire joined him often, fighting against him in silent duels. Sparks flew when their blades met, and though tired, they refused to slow down. Laura spent her nights with maps glowing on the table. She studied every star, searching for safe paths. Sometimes she found routes that avoided patrols of bounty hunters. Sometimes she marked fuel stops. Without her, the ship would have been lost in the black void. Matthew never rested. He worked in the engine room, hands black with grease, eyes heavy but steady. Now the ship was old, broken in many places, but under his care, it still flew. He built small weapons from scraps, and each time he showed one, Daniel smiled with approval. Ethan carried all their weight. He stood guard in the cockpit, watching the stars. His mind was never at ease, always thinking of what lay ahead. He knew the council wanted them dead. He knew bounty hunters would not stop. But his heart stayed fixed on Earth. It was the one place left that could give them a chance. One night, as the crew gathered around the table, Laura spoke. Supplies were almost gone. Fuel would not last for much longer. If they did not find shelter soon, they would not even reach Earth. The silence in the room was sharp. Daniel slammed his fist down and said they should take supplies by force if needed. He argued they had spent too long running, hiding from enemies. Claire reminded him that reckless fights would only draw the council's fleets. She said if they wanted to reach Earth, they had to stay alive first. Matthew spoke next, his voice calm but steady. He told them he could stretch the fuel, make it last longer, but food was harder to solve. If they starved, the ship meant nothing. Ethan listened to each word. He knew they stood at the edge of survival. At last, Ethan made the choice. They would risk one more stop. Not on a council world, not on a busy station, but on a hidden outpost where smugglers traded. It was dangerous, but it was the only way. The ship dropped out of the void near a silent moon. Lights flickered below, signs of life in the darkness. Ethan led Daniel and Claire down to the surface, while Laura and Matthew kept watch above. The outpost was a place of shadows. Men and women with scarred faces moved between stalls, selling weapons, fuel, and food. Eyes followed Ethan and his team, recognizing exiles and smelling danger. They bought what they could with the little they had, but whispers spread fast. A tall man stepped into their path, his face marked with greed. He told them the council had set a price on their heads. Alive or dead, they were worth more than any trade. Daniel reached for his blade, but Ethan held him back. The man drew a gun, and others stepped from the shadows, circling them. For a moment, it seemed the end had come. Then Claire acted. She moved fast, kicking the weapon from the man's hand and striking him down. Daniel leapt into the fight, his blade flashing in the dim light. Ethan fought with his fists, sharp and sure, dropping enemies one by one. The fight was quick but brutal. Bodies hit the ground, cries filled the air, and the crowd scattered in fear. At last, silence returned to the outpost. The tall man lay on the ground, clutching his wounds, his eyes wide with rage. Ethan stood over him and warned that if anyone else tried to claim their heads, the result would be the same. They gathered the food and fuel, returning to the ship before more enemies arrived. Laura met them at the airlock, her face tight with worry. Matthew checked their supplies and nodded. It would be enough to reach Earth. That night, as the ship rose back into the sky, Ethan thought about the fight. Every step toward Earth was a battle. Every breath was bought with blood. But the fire in their hearts burned brighter than before. The crew gathered once more around the table. Ethan told them the truth. Earth might not welcome them. It had been silent for too long, yet he said they had no choice but to go. They had fought too hard to turn back now. Laura looked at him and said Earth might still remember its children. Daniel said, even if Earth had forgotten, they would remind it. Claire promised she would stand with them no matter what. Matthew only said he would keep the ship flying until the end. Together, they set their course. The stars stretched before them, cold and endless, but their eyes were fixed on one light. Home was waiting. The ship broke through the last stretch of the void, and at last the blue and green world of Earth filled the screen. For a moment, no one spoke. The sight of home left them silent, each remembering the land where they were born. Oceans shone like mirrors, mountains rose through clouds, and the glow of cities marked the ground below. Ethan's hand tightened on the controls. His voice was steady as he told the others that they were not safe yet. The council might have sent warnings to Earth, calling them traitors. They could not know what welcome waited. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sharp. He said that if Earth closed its doors, they would fight their way in. Claire placed her hand on the table and said they would not fight their own people unless forced. She said they must give Earth a chance to choose. Laura sent a signal down to the surface. The message was simple. They were sons and daughters of Earth. Returning home after exile, they asked for safe landing. Minutes passed with no reply. Silence pressed on them like a stone. At last a voice came through. The speaker was calm but strong. They were cleared to land at the capital. Ethan looked at his crew and saw relief mixed with doubt. He guided the ship down, engines roaring as the clouds parted. They landed in a wide field outside the city. Soldiers in dark uniforms surrounded them at once, rifles raised. Ethan ordered the crew to stand tall and show no fear. The ramp lowered, and the five walked out together. At the front of the soldiers stood a woman in silver armor. Her crown marked her as Queen Elizabeth of Earth. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp as she studied the exiles, then stepped forward. He told her they had been cast out by the council for refusing to follow orders of cruelty. He said they had fought to protect the weak, and for that, they were branded traitors. Now they've sought only to stand once more with their own people. The Queen did not answer at once. She walked among them, her gaze steady. Laura met her eyes without flinching. Daniel stood like a wall of iron. Claire bowed her head slightly but held her ground. Matthew stood quiet, hands folded behind his back. At last the Queen spoke. She said Earth had heard many stories from the council. They'd called these warriors dangerous rebels and murderers. But Earth had also heard whispers of their true deeds. Villages saved, chains broken, lives spared. She said Earth must decide for itself which story was true. The soldiers lowered their weapons. The Queen lifted her hand and declared that these men and women were welcome. They were not traitors to Earth, were heroes who had stood when others bowed. The people of the capital gathered around the field. They cheered as the warriors walked forward. Voices rose, shouting their names, lifting them higher than they had ever stood before. For the first time since exile, hope filled their hearts. That night, they were taken into the great hall of the palace. Long banners hung from the walls, and the air carried the weight of history. The Queen sat upon her throne, but her tone was not distant. She asked Ethan to speak of the truth. Ethan told the tale of the council's hunger for power, of the raids against weak colonies, of the chains placed upon children. He told of the day they refused to obey, and of the exile that followed. His words were sharp and honest, without fear. Laura added her voice, telling of battles fought not for glory but for survival. Claire spoke of the faces of those they had saved, the farmers and families who had nothing but hope. Daniel told of the soldiers they fought against, men forced to serve cruel masters. Matthew described the machines and weapons built to crush any who dared resist. The hall was silent when they finished. The Queen rose and declared that Earth would no longer bow to the council. If the council called these warriors enemies, then Earth would share their fate. If they were hunted, Earth would stand as their shield. The words struck like fire. The warriors looked at one another and saw the weight of a new path before them. They had come seeking refuge, but they had found something greater. Earth was no longer silent, was ready to rise. That night, as the city burned with celebration, Ethan stood on a balcony with his crew. He told them this was only the beginning. The council would not ignore Earth's defiance. War would come. Daniel said he welcomed it. Claire said she would fight beside them until the end. Laura said they must prepare the people. Matthew only smiled and said he would build what was needed. Below them, the people of Earth sang their names. For the first time, the exiles were not outcasts. They were home. The days that followed were filled with unrest. Word spread quickly through the stars that Earth had welcomed the exiles. The council's fury was swift. Fleets gathered on the edges of the solar system. They did not come with words of peace. They came with fire and steel. Ethan stood in the war room of the palace. Maps of the solar system shone on the walls. He traced the path of the enemy fleets with his hand. They would strike soon. There was no doubt. Laura worked beside him, her voice sharp as she laid out plans. She spoke of choke points, of hidden paths through the asteroid belt, of how to use Earth's gravity to their advantage. Claire trained soldiers on the grounds below, turning farmers and workers into fighters. Daniel led drills with the young men, his voice like thunder, teaching them to strike with precision and not fear. Matthew built machines in secret halls, shaping weapons from Earth's old technology and the scraps they had brought from exile. Queen Elizabeth watched them with steady eyes. She knew Earth had little time. She called councils with her generals, but it was the exiles who carried the hearts of the people. The men and women of Earth looked at them and believed victory was possible. One night, Ethan stood before a group of new soldiers. He told them that Earth had been silent too long. He said the council thought Earth was weak, forgotten, a place without strength. But now, Earth would show the truth. His voice was not loud, yet every ear bent toward it. The soldiers raised their rifles and swore to fight. The first attack came at dawn. A fleet of dark ships pierced the edge of the solar system. They struck with speed, dropping fire upon Earth's outer defenses. Explosions lit the skies above the moons, and the stations guarding the belts burned. Daniel led a squadron of fighters into the black. He shouted for his men to hold the line. His ship darted through the void, striking at the enemy with fury. One by one, their fighters fell, but Daniel never slowed, cut through them with skill born from years of battle. Claire fought on the ground. When enemy troops landed near the oceans, she met them with Earth soldiers. The battle raged on the beaches, waves red with fire. Claire's blade struck with deadly speed, and her men followed her with courage. She told them not to give ground, and they did not. Matthew's machines roared to life in the heart of the city. Cannons rose from hidden bunkers, firing into the sky. Shields flickered to life, built from pieces of forgotten tech he had restored. Each strike he had planned slowed the enemy, forcing them to struggle. Laura commanded from the palace towers. Her eyes never left the maps. She moved units with calm precision, sending reinforcements to the weak points before the enemy could break through. Her orders saved thousands, and her name spread among the soldiers like fire. Ethan led the charge in space. His ship moved with fearless speed, breaking through the enemy lines. He did not hide behind shields. He struck straight at their command vessels. His voice echoed through the comms, urging Earth's fighters to press forward. The battle lasted long into the night. Fire tore across the skies, and the ground shook with thunder. Villages burned, but the people did not yield. From mountains to oceans, men and women rose with weapons in hand. They fought not as slaves, but as defenders of their home. At last, the first wave of the enemy broke. Ships retreated into the void, leaving wreckage scattered across the stars. On the ground, silence fell as the last invaders fled. Ethan stood on the balcony of the palace, smoke rising in the distance. The people gathered below, their voices rising in victory. But he did not smile. He knew this was only the beginning. The council would not stop with one strike. They would come again, stronger and with greater fury. Daniel walked up beside him, his uniform torn, his blade stained. He said the people had fought well. Claire joined them, her face marked with dust but her eyes burning. She said Earth was not weak, not anymore. Matthew appeared with grease still on his hands, and Laura followed. Her maps rolled under her arm. Together they looked out at the city, at the people cheering their names. Ethan told them the truth. The war had only begun. But tonight, Earth had stood, and the galaxy had seen it. The fire of defiance burned brighter than ever. The smoke of the first battle still hung in the skies when the next wave arrived. The council sent more fleets, larger and stronger, determined to crush Earth before its defiance spread. The people of Earth had little time to rest. Soldiers barely laid down their weapons before alarms sounded again. Ethan gathered his team in the palace war room. The lights of enemy ships glowed on the maps, filling the edges of the solar system like a storm. He looked at each of them in turn. Daniel stood with his blade strapped to his back, restless for the fight. Claire's eyes were steady, calm, but sharp. Laura studied the maps, already searching for weak points. Matthew's hands were black with oil, his mind fixed on machines he had yet to finish. Ethan told them the truth. The next battle would decide if Earth survived or fell. He said they must fight with everything they had. None of them argued. The fleet struck at dusk. Great warships filled the skies above Earth, their cannons burning through the atmosphere. The ground shook with every strike. Villages turned to ash, rivers boiled with fire. Yet the people stood their ground. Daniel led a squadron of Earth's fighters into the black. His voice roared across the comms, ordering his men to break the enemy's wings. His ship darted like a hawk through the void, cutting down one fighter after another, fought with fury but not recklessness. His men followed his example, striking with precision. Even when outnumbered, they did not falter. On the ground, Claire stood at the front lines. The enemy soldiers poured from dropships, armed with heavy rifles and steel blades. Claire met them head-on. Her blade flashed in the smoke, cutting through enemy ranks. She shouted for her soldiers to hold, and they held with iron will. Blood soaked the earth, but her line never broke. Laura stayed high in the palace tower, her voice guiding the battle. She moved units like pieces on a board, sending reinforcements to burning villages, shifting reserves to weak points before they shattered. Her mind was sharp as steel, her plans saving thousands. Even when reports of death came, she did not flinch. She knew hesitation meant defeat. Matthew's machines filled the battlefields. Towers of steel fired bursts of energy into the skies, striking enemy warships from the ground. Hidden cannons tore through dropships before they could unload. Shields flickered above cities, built from scraps he had shaped with his hands. Every weapon he built bought Earth another breath of survival. Ethan commanded the fleet above Earth. His ship cut into the enemy's formation, striking at their command vessels. He ordered bold maneuvers, sending fighters into narrow gaps where enemy fire was strongest. His courage turned fear into strength. His voice steadied every pilot who heard it. He fought at the front, never hiding behind others. The battle raged for hours. Flames tore across the sky, the oceans roared with burning wrecks, and the mountains echoed with the clash of steel. The enemy pressed hard, sending wave after wave. Yet Earth did not fall. At one point, enemy forces broke through and stormed the edge of the capital. Civilians ran through the streets, fire chasing them. Claire and her soldiers rushed in, blades and rifles cutting down the invaders. She fought until her arms ached, blood covering her armor, but she never stopped. Daniel's fighters struck from above, blasting the enemy columns, clearing paths for the people to escape. Laura sent a final order, pulling reserves from the north and pushing them into the heart of the enemy. Matthew's largest weapon, a cannon hidden in the mountains, roared to life. Its blast tore through the skies, shattering the enemy flagship in a burst of light. The fleets faltered. Without their command ship, their lines broke. Ethan led the charge, driving them back into the void. Daniel's squadron pursued, striking down the stragglers. On the ground, Claire and her men cleared the last of the invaders from the capital.
Ow.
When the battle ended, silence filled the air. Wreckage burned in the skies, and bodies lay on the ground. The people wept for the fallen, but they also raised their voices in victory. Earth had stood against the greatest fleet the Council had ever sent, and it had not broken. That night in the palace, the 5 exiles stood with Queen Elizabeth. She told them the people of Earth had seen the truth. They were no longer outcasts. They were defenders, protectors, heroes of their home. Ethan looked at his team. Daniel still fierce but smiling with pride. Claire, tired yet unyielding. Laura, her map stained with sweat and ink. Matthew, hands scarred but steady. Together, they had given Earth a chance to stand. Ethan raised his hand and swore that as long as they lived, Earth would never fall. The others joined him, their voices one. Outside, the city cheered, their cries rising into the night. The war was far from over, but Earth had shown its strength. The galaxy had seen it. The days after the second great battle were filled with both pride and fear. The people of Earth had stood strong, but the cost had been heavy. Villages were ash, fields were burned, and countless families wept for their dead. Yet in every corner of the world, the people also spoke of courage. They spoke of Ethan and his team. They spoke of the Queen who had not abandoned them. The Council did not retreat for long. Scouts brought news that more fleets gathered beyond the edge of the solar system. Stronger fleets carrying the finest soldiers and the deadliest weapons. The next strike would not be meant to test Earth. It would be meant to end it. Queen Elizabeth stood in the war room, her armor shining under the dim lights. She listened to her generals and to Ethan's team. At last, she raised her voice. She said Earth would not wait for death to fall from the sky. If the Council wanted war, then Earth would rise and meet them. Her decision shocked many. It had been centuries since a ruler of Earth had stepped into the front lines. Yet she would not remain behind her throne while her people bled. She ordered her own warship to be made ready, and she declared that she would ride into battle. The news spread like fire. Across cities and towns, the people cheered. Soldiers trained harder, their spirits lifted by the thought that their queen would fight beside them. When the Council fleets arrived, they found Earth ready. Dozens of fighters filled the skies, cannons waited in the mountains, and warships rose from the oceans. At the front of the armada flew the Queen's flagship, her banner high. Ethan stood at her side on the bridge. Daniel commanded squadrons in the void. Claire led ground forces on the shores. Laura directed the flow of battle, and Matthew prepared his newest weapon. Each of them carried the weight of the moment, knowing this fight would decide more than just Earth. It would decide the future of every world that watched. The battle began with thunder. The Council fleets opened fire, their cannons burning bright across the stars. Earth's ships answered with fierce strikes. The skies turned into fire. The Queen gave her orders with calm power. She moved her flagship into the heart of the fight, not hiding behind shields, but striking with deadly precision. Her courage filled every soldier who saw her banner. Daniel's squadron met the enemy fighters head-on. His voice roared through the comms, driving his men forward. Ships exploded around him, but he never slowed. His fighter cut through the dark like a blade, and his men followed with unbreakable spirit. On the ground, Claire met the landing troops. Waves of soldiers poured from dropships, their weapons heavy, their armor thick. She charged at the front, her blade flashing in the smoke. Her soldiers followed with cries of defiance. The battle on the shores was fierce, but she refused to yield. Every step the enemy tried to take was paid for with their blood. Laura commanded from the palace tower once more. Her eyes moved across the maps, her voice sharp as steel. She shifted units, called in reserves, and saw patterns no one else could. Her orders turned chaos into order, and again, she saved the weak from being crushed. Matthew's greatest creation waited hidden in the mountains. It was a weapon unlike any Earth had seen before, one that bent the pull of gravity itself. When the enemy's heaviest ships moved close, Matthew gave the signal. The weapon fired, and the very air trembled. The enemy vessels twisted, torn apart by forces they could not withstand. The wrecks burned as they fell into the seas. The tide of battle began to turn. Where the Council had expected weakness, they found fury. Where they had expected fear, they found fire. Earth did not fall back. Earth struck forward. On the flagship, Ethan fought beside the Queen. Together they gave orders, their voices steady even as the ship shook with enemy fire. When one of the Queen's guards begged her to retreat, she refused. She said Earth needed to see its rulers stand, not hide. Hours passed, and still the battle raged. The oceans glowed with fire, the mountains shook with cannon blasts, and the skies tore with light. Yet by nightfall, the enemy line broke. Ships pulled back into the void, retreating from the fury of Earth. Silence fell at last. The people raised their voices in victory, their cheers echoing through the cities. The Queen stood on the bridge of her ship, her armor scarred, her crown bent, but her eyes unyielding. She had fought and she had stood, and her people had seen it. Ethan and his team gathered at her side. Daniel's uniform was torn, Claire's blade was red, Laura's maps were stained, and Matthew's hands were burned from his machine. Yet all of them stood tall. Queen looked at them and said Earth was no longer just defending itself. Earth was leading, and the galaxy would never forget what it had seen. The night air smelled of smoke and metal. Earth stood quiet under the stars. The Council's fleets had broken. The enemy ships lay in shards above the atmosphere, or drifted broken in space. The people of Earth watched the sky, waiting for the final word. Queen Elizabeth stood on a tall platform in the Capitol Square. Her armor was cut and dented. Her face was smeared with ash and sweat. She lifted her hand for silence. Tens of thousands of people waited. Children held torches. Workers held tools they had used as weapons. Soldiers stood in rows. Ethan, Laura, Daniel, Claire, and Matthew walked beside the Queen. Each bore scars. Each bore grief. Each bore hope. The exiles, once driven out of the galaxy, now stood in the hollow of victory. The Queen spoke. She said Earth had won not by power alone, it won by heart. Earth had refused to bow. Earth had refused to live in fear. She named the warriors protectors of Earth. She said no council in the stars could claim superiority over the people of Earth ever again. People cheered. Voices broke into song. Trumpets sounded. Fires lit the square. The lamps glowed like stars fallen into the ground. The children cried in joy. Mothers hugged fathers. The old men stood straight. The Queen placed a medal on Ethan. She touched Laura's shoulder and pinned a badge on her chest. Daniel knelt, and the Queen clasped his hands. Claire stood tall while the Queen clasped her arm. Matthew bowed, and she laid a ring upon his finger. Each token meant honor, each token a promise. Ethan looked at Laura. She nodded. Laura looked at Daniel. Claire looked at Matthew. The bond between them was no longer simple friendship. It was loyalty sworn in fire. They shared one life now with all of Earth. From the edges of the square came survivors, villagers whose homes were burnt, soldiers whose friends were dead, engineers whose machines were torn apart. All walked toward the platform. They carried children, bandages, hope. The Queen opened her arms. She told them Earth would rebuild. She told them Earth would heal its wounds. She told them Earth's promise. No child hungry, no field empty, no heart alone. Ethan lifted his voice, said he had been an exile, said that when the council threw them out, he thought all was lost. Said seeing Earth now, seeing people stand for justice, he believed again. He said Earth was not simply a world, it was home. Home for all who choose to defend it. Daniel spoke of the sacrifice, said many had died so that the council would learn, said every drop of blood paid for this moment. Claire spoke of courage, said courage is not born in peace, it is born in grief, in battle, in standing however small you feel. Laura spoke of the work ahead. She said building roads, homes. Trust was harder than building walls. Matthew spoke of machines, of repair, of rebuilding towers. He said Earth would not hide from its past. It would learn from it. The Queen raised a sword above her head. Steel glinted in torchlight. She called upon Earth's people to stand together. She called upon the exiles to lead them. She called upon all those free in heart to rise. A hush came. The light of dawn edged over the horizon. Birds sang, the wind warmed. The people stared at the east. The sky turned pale gold. Then Earth's drums beat. The crowd surged forward. They carried shovels, hammers, seeds, prepared to work, rebuild homes, plant fields, heal wounds. They carried hope, not weapons. But they were ready if the council returned. Queen Elizabeth stepped into the crowd. She stood with Ethan and his team. The guards lowered their weapons. The walls of fear were breaking. The sons of many worlds now witnessed Earth stand. Far above, in distant systems, watchers saw lights. They saw Earth renew itself. They saw voices lifted in song. The galaxy trembled. Council sent no word. Its fleets were broken. Its voice crumbled. It would take time to recover. When it tried to raise power again, it would remember Earth. It would remember those who refused to bow. Ethan breathed deep. He looked at Laura and Claire and Daniel and Matthew. He saw grief, but also joy. He saw scars, but also strength. He saw a future worth fighting for. Earth welcomed them not as exiles, it welcomed them as heroes. Heroes of humanity. They stood together under the pale gold sky. The world would remember this moment forever. Home had one. Human hearts had one. And from this day, Earth was not merely a world among many. It was a banner of hope. It was a light in the galaxy. The exiles led it. The galaxy must see it.